On this Juneteenth Sunday, as we celebrate freedom, we also have a story from the Gospels about freedom, the freedom that comes when we are seen fully and wholly by God and can gift the same to others. Listen to the living word of the Lord from Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 39. Jesus and the disciples arrived at the region of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. As Jesus stepped out on shore, a man from the city who had demons met him. For a long time, he had not worn any clothes and did not live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, shouting, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now there on the hillside, a large herd of swine was feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter these. So Jesus gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd stampeded down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the swineherds saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what had happened, and when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they became frightened. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then the whole throng of people of the surrounding region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged that he might go with Jesus, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. Holy wisdom, holy words. Thanks be to God. About 5 years ago, when I was house hunting here in the Poconos, Sarah Kramer showed me a number of houses, and one day she had 3 to show me. So the first place we went to see was up on a hill. It was a pretty steep driveway. The yard was covered in bamboo. There were trees growing in the flower beds. The whole front entrance was overgrown. The eyes told you that this foreclosure was pretty run down. But Sarah said her daughter had told us, "Don't look at the outside." So we looked at the house, and I immediately put an offer in. It was a perfect location. It was the perfect price point. It was the perfect driveway. Well, it's really not a perfect driveway. But what could actually be seen at that house was not what I saw that house could be. To be seen and to see are powerful actions. We all know how deeply significant it feels when we feel seen and loved for who we truly are. We all know how it hurts to be seen in ways that aren't accurate or complete. And we're growing as a culture into an understanding of the hidden biases that humans have that cause us to both see incorrectly and be seen in ways that damage our psyches and our culture. One fascinating area in which we are changing very rapidly is the body acceptance movement, recognizing that bodies are made in all kinds of ways and are right as they are. In a recent pastor nominating committee experience, a young woman told me the story of a female candidate who explored the church's endowment fund and policies, information which was found in public places and in the mission study of the congregation she'd been given. And when she asked pointed questions, she was seen as aggressive and pushy. When a male candidate, a little bit later, looked deeply into the same issue and asked questions, he was seen as taking initiative. The young woman tried to name the discrepancy in how candidates were seen, but the committee could not see her point. to be seen and to see. Jesus knows that power. After John baptized him, a voice proclaimed what God saw. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. And having been seen by God fully, deeply, and completely, Jesus begins his ministry in which he sees others as he was seen. We're not so good at that all the time. And even as we hear about God's grace, as we read scriptures that tell us that God knew us before we were born, that God's grace and love are ours, that God loves unconditionally and works without ceasing for our health and well-being, our habitual response, either aloud or deep in the recesses of our identity, our habitual response is to make excuses about why we don't deserve it, or why God won't actually give it to us, or why God doesn't care or doesn't act. We very often resist opening ourselves to experience God's unconditional grace. And I don't know why. In our biblical stories, though, we see the same condition. Those who are open to being fully seen by Jesus are changed and then called to respond. Those who don't open themselves stay in the same state they are, and usually those are the religious people. Being seen and seeing is a deeply intimate, vulnerable state. And I think for us as human beings, it's really kind of far easier and safer to set rules so that we can earn or deserve God's love. It's much easier than simply being open enough to be fully and completely seen. And so we insist that the biblical text must be interpreted in a particular way. And we determine a certain correct lifestyle, and there's a dress code. And we set up power structures in the home and in the church, and we give ourselves authority over each other's faith. And we decide that some faith practices are good, and some are suspect, and some are forbidden. And when we see life and faith and God this way, through eyes of judgment and control, intentionally or unintentionally, we project a picture of God that most certainly reflects our biases way more than God's reality. It warps what others can see of who God is. Jesus showed us what it was like to fully accept who God intended him to be. And having been at his very best, he saw God as good and gracious love, God whose purpose enacted love in justice and shalom. Having been seen and seeing God as such, he also saw others through God's eyes. This trip across the Sea of Galilee took Jesus and his disciples into Gentile country. And as Jesus stepped out on land, this man met him, this man who for such a long time had worn no clothes, lived in the tombs, and could not be bound by chains or shackles. You can guess how that man was seen by his community. Disgust. He was filthy. Fear. He was violent and uncontrollable. Shame for the nakedness. Unclean and unacceptable for his proximity to the tombs. And because of that, we can probably guess how that man saw himself. When that man saw Jesus, he recognized a man connected to the Most High God. For Jesus had commanded already that the demons come out of the man, and thus Jesus had seen him not only for who he was at the moment, but more significantly, Jesus saw him for who he really was. The swineherds saw quite a lot that day. They saw the interaction with the man and the demons, which were called out and entered the herd of pigs, and they saw the resulting rush to the water. And they ran to tell. And when people returned to see for themselves, they found this man sitting with Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. I can't help but wonder what the people saw when they arrived to find pigs floating in the water and the formerly crazy man chatting with Jesus like any of them would have. Did they see the end of an effective story to keep their kids in line? You know, the one that goes, if you do this or if you don't do this, you're going to wind up like the man in the tombs? Did they see a shameful waste of perfectly good bacon? Did they see a man connected to the Most High God? Actually, two men now connected to the Most High God? Did they see the good news that no one is beyond healing? Did they understand that they too would be seen as the demoniac was seen by Jesus, healthy and whole and precious in God's sight? Seems they did not. They saw all the reasons to be afraid. Now, we humans, we know that what we know is what we know, and we don't need to know anything different. So they asked Jesus to leave because they didn't really want to change their minds or their hearts or the way they saw the world. If that Jesus was a man connected to the Most High God, he would see all their faults, all their fears, all their frailties. And they might wind up naked, violent, and possessed because that's what they would have done if they had been God. They didn't know the grace-filled power of being seen as God sees. Those who encountered Jesus during his ministry experienced that powerful connection, and Jesus saw them as God saw them. And we who know Jesus and his ministry should be taught that we are seen by God as whole and sinless, seen by God for what we can be. And even when we struggle or fall short, God sees what God intends. And when we open ourselves to that grace, when we confess where we've fallen short, when by the power of God's Spirit, we understand how God in fact sees us, then we want to tell, and we want to show, and we want to follow. Just like the man who lived in the tombs, it's a challenge very often to believe we are or can be how God sees us. Oh, we can certainly see the depth of sin in humanity. The whole world's going to hell in a handbasket. We fail to believe how God sees us because we misunderstand, because we don't have the complete perspective, because we don't want to change what's working for us at the moment, because we feel like we can't change what happens around us. And when we get lost in those can'ts and won'ts and don'ts, it's because we are not truly accepting that God sees and loves us as God sees and loves us. And when we crack ourselves open so that we can truly have that experience of being seen as God sees us, then our sight changes. We learn to see with grace and love those who live in the margins, those who are other than us, those oppressed in so many ways. We learn to see as beloved those in the finest clothes and those clothed in tattered rags. We learn to see as beloved those bound by chains they cannot break, and those who break even the most loving bonds because they don't know how to accept them. We learn to see as God sees because we have been seen. And now we can do no less. And now we can do no less. Amen.